Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more months than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident. Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Michael Reddington. Michael is a certified forensic interviewer and president of Intricacies, Inc., which integrates key components of effective non-confrontational interview techniques with current business research for executives. In his new book, The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation, Michael draws on his background in forensics and his understanding of human behavior through interrogation to teach readers how to improve their listening, communication, and relationship building skills, and how to use the truth to their advantage. The disciplined listening method, also describes the 7 phases of potentially contentious conversations so that leaders can truly understand what their audience experiences during important interactions. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Michael. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and sharing with us some of your life journey.
I appreciate you having me, Dwight. Thank you very much. Excited for the conversation.
Yeah, so am I. As I was reviewing information about you last night and going through and just researching and putting some questions together, I was extremely excited because I've never heard of this combination. So I'm looking forward to diving into this and finding out some more information. And of course, the listeners are going to be able to find out as well. So, Mike, one of the things that I focus on is a person's origin story. And it's not just, what's your backstory from the time that you finished high school. And the reason for that is I believe our whole life is centered around our origin story from our earliest recollections as a little tyke all the way up to where we are today. So could you do me a favor and tell me what key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently?
We're going to need a lot more time.
That's okay.
I'll hit the highlights because I don't want to just take the whole conversation here. So for me, I agree with you. Where I am now is it's not the end, obviously. Hopefully we have a lot more time and a lot more achievements left on this planet. But really, so far where I am is the result of an innumerable amount of life experiences, either personal or work, none of which were intentional, and all of which added up to get me where I am. So when I think back to my childhood, I really think back to how my parents raised me. I'm very fortunate. My parents are still married. They're still together. I have one brother. He's 2 years younger than me. He's one of my best friends in the world. But as we went through the trials and tribulations of growing up, and both my brother and I, we had our challenges and added stress to our family's lives, like most good young boys should probably do, maybe more than that. But I really have a lot to be grateful for both of my parents, and particularly for this conversation, for how my dad worked really hard to try to teach my brother and I to think like problem solvers, not to get over emotional, to focus on the solution, not the problem. One of the things he used to say a lot was you can raise the bridge or lower the water. So when I think back to his teachings really through life, and of course, as a teenager, I wanted nothing to do with listening to any of that, right? But thankfully it stayed in my head and paid dividends for me as I grew up. And I think that some of those decisions that my brother and I made that added some of the stress to my parents' life, surviving those things and growing and learning from those things created a mindset and experience set and a sense of calm that has continued to grow and contribute to a lot of the professional conversations that I've had in my career. So going back to my childhood days, I would say, those would really be the two really big areas. Professionally, I started out as a special education teacher and baseball coach, working with both children and adults at that stage in my life who either had physical or developmental disabilities. Some were born that way. Some had been in horrific accidents, and the disabilities were the result of that. So, and literally when I was still in high school is when I started that. So from a young adult age, late teenager, early adult years, I was communicating with people who were nonverbal or were limited verbally or were limited physically with what they could do or had a wide range of emotional shifts. And, for me, I was just trying to do the best I could to care for people and provide them with the dignity and life and experiences that any of us should have the ability to enjoy to the degree possible. But even at that age, I was learning to communicate with people and read nuances in behavior and understand contextualized situations. I didn't realize I was going to have anything to do with my future career. I mean, I thought that would be my future career, to be honest. I did that for several years before getting talked into trying the financial industry because it was the 90s and that's what everybody was doing. It wasn't for me. I lasted there for 2 years, 1 month and 2 days before it was time to be on time to get out. But even in that job, learning to have conversations with people who were emotional, didn't understand completely the details of why they were upset, needed to be educated in an emotional conversation. All of these were lessons that continued to add up over time. And then after a series of part-time jobs, ending up in the field of investigations, it was a part-time job that got out of control. This wasn't a career that I thought that I would have. I started out with a part-time job. They offered me a management job. I wasn't smart enough to say no. After being a manager for a short period, I had to conduct my first interrogation and I tripped and fell and landed on a confession and said, wait a minute, how did that just happen? And then the more interrogation responsibilities I had, the more training I put myself through and really just became fascinated with why are people choosing to share sensitive information with me under vulnerable circumstances that almost certainly carries consequences for them? Like, why are they doing this? And that really led me down the psychological path more so than just the interrogation technique path. So I started by earning my certified forensic interviewer designation, and then was recruited to join the world leader in non-confrontational interview and interrogation training and advising. And I moved to Chicago. I ran their investigations division. I traveled the world teaching and interview and interrogation and conducting interrogations on a contract basis. And I guess there were two blessings within all of that. Number one, spending nearly 2 decades having conversations with people who wanted nothing to do with me and having to get the truth at the end of those conversations. And number two, literally traveling the world and meeting so many people from so many backgrounds with so many stories just helped me put together this library of experiences that gave me an appreciation for both what makes us all similar and unique, which makes it easier to empathize and identify with people during these conversations. And all of those things eventually just coalesced to where I said, wait a minute, I appear to see all of these issues that we're dealing with in the investigative interviewing world that senior executives and CEOs and salespeople and HR professionals, they're dealing with in the business world, just underneath different names. And when I was going through my research, I came to 2 core realizations. The first was that the best leaders and the best interrogators capitalize on the same 2 core skills, vision and influence. And the second is that the cognitive process that leads interrogation suspects to truthfully commit to saying I did it is essentially identical to the cognitive processes that lead customers to commit to saying I'll buy it and employees to commit to saying I'll do it. And once I stumbled upon those, I said, okay, change of direction, number 9,763 for my life. I'm going to still stay involved in interrogation because I think it's fun and there's a lot of great relationships with people I have in that industry. But I pivoted, and I'm very lucky to have the relationship I do with my former employer. I'm still very much connected to them, but I created my own company, Inquasive, developed the discipline listening method, and now I focus my time and dedicate my efforts to teaching business professionals how to reduce missed opportunities and increase commitments to action by applying these strategic, ethical observation and persuasion techniques that I learned along the way. So believe it or not, that is the Cliff Notes version of the story. But I think that weaves together from childhood to early professional to how all of that Legoed itself together to get us here.
Oh, absolutely. Very, very integral of how you laid that out. It's very good. You're a good storyteller. You're welcome. So yeah, I'm just looking at some of the notes I wrote down in regards to you mentioned your dad taught you guys to be, to think, to be solution orientated.
Mhm.
That is a big problem today in our world. So you were blessed at a very young age to have a father that would, do that for you, that would make you think about things. Too many people react as opposed to thinking and understanding and then, applying something to fix the solution, find a solution. And if we're taught, like your dad taught you, to be solution oriented right off the bat, our lives in this world, all of us would have such a better lives. I don't think we'd have the wars that we're having either, or the strife that we have even on our corner street between neighbors, if people would just listen. But we'll get into that too. There's a huge part of our problems just because we don't listen. And teaching you calmness, that's one of the things I practice. Listeners, it is something that is you need to learn. It just doesn't come natural. So, Michael talked about the fact that he was taught calmness, and that's a great skill to have, because if somebody's coming at you, whether it's a person or an outside force or circumstance, if you can learn to stay calm, it's hard for you to get pushed off your pedestal. You can literally still stand and weather any storm. So I loved you talking about that. And it's interesting how you went from part-time into management and, all of a sudden into interrogation, which is, it's so key to understand though, that in today's world, people don't watch how people look when they communicate. They don't listen to their tonality. They don't watch body language. And if they could learn that, if this was taught, I have an issue with this. They should start teaching this already in grade school. Hey, John, Sally, listen, John, Sally wouldn't have got so upset if you would have noticed that her body was all tense. You would have noticed if you listened to the fact she was screaming at you, and you might have backed down, but instead you collided with her and you just made it worse. Or, I'm not saying that it's a female male thing. It's just an example that I think we need to take it more seriously, how we communicate by looking at people. I know, and I don't know if you realize this or not, most likely did, over the pandemic, I actually enjoyed the fact of people having to wear masks, because I was forced to do something that I hadn't done most of my life: watch people's eyes. And people's eyes tell so much of a story. I don't know if you probably know that even better than I do, how much our eyes tell as opposed to what we say in our bodies. So do you have any thing that you'd like to add about that?
Sure. And there's actually a couple of things. I'll get to the eyes, I promise. Even going back to the calm, when our emotions spike and essentially that fight or flight response starts to kick in, literally all our blood and oxygen goes to our hands and feet and leaves our brain. And that is blood and oxygen we need in our brain in order to make good decisions. So at the very least, for all the times my mom told me, take a deep breath, count to 10. Just by controlling our breath rate, getting more blood and oxygen back in our brain, we're able to make better decisions. So not only does staying calm help us think and problem solve, I also truly believe that the person who can't be unsettled is the most unsettling person. So if we're in a difficult negotiation or difficult coaching conversation, or maybe a difficult investigative interview, depending on what your listeners do for a living, and somebody is trying to get under our skin, if that's their game plan, and they can't get under our skin, now they're in deep water, because they're the ones who are looking at us saying, wait a minute, if I can't make him feel uncomfortable, what does he know that I don't? Where is he going that I haven't been? What have I missed? What do I understand? What don't I understand? And now we have the strategic initiative in the conversation because we were able to stay calm. So there really are some very big benefits there. To get back to the eyes piece, and even the nonverbal behavior piece, by and large, I agree. It's not something that is taught often. And when it is, it's often full of myths and misconceptions, which can create problems in and of itself. But yes, the more we become digitally focused, the less we have that opportunity to focus on each other. During the height of the pandemic, one of the questions I would get often is, Mike, on the Zoom calls, I don't have any behavior to read. I'm at a disadvantage. And my honest answer to that is, au contraire, we have an advantage. Statistically speaking, we probably weren't as good at reading nonverbal behavior as we thought we were anyway. And now we're juggling fewer variables. Because I have no idea what's going on around you right now, I can't assume that any of your nonverbal changes are directly related to anything I'm saying. So I have to cautiously read those. But now what I can do, especially if I'm wearing headphones and there's no distractions behind me and I'm really focused on you, is I can pay attention to what you mentioned, the tonality and the verbal changes and their word choices, and something as small as if you start to say one word and cut it off and say a different word. Now I know how you really felt. I know how you want me to think you're feeling, and I understand you're going through some impression management. So I'm getting a lot of strategic intelligence from that just by focusing on one variable instead of trying to juggle so many. When we get to the eyes, yes, there is an immense amount of intelligence we can get from the eyes. They're a great clue into somebody's emotional state. The muscles around our forehead and in our face are fast twitch muscles, and therefore they tend to react the fastest and they're hardest to control. And actually the muscles in our forehead are among some of the most reliable muscles to read, because I'm forgetting the specific term off the top of my head, but it is nearly impossible to use the muscles in our forehead to demonstrate fake emotions. So we can show a fake smile. We do that 1,000 times a day. But to your point about the mask, if I want to tell if somebody's giving me a real smile or a fake smile, the mouth isn't going to tell me, the eyes will. Because if somebody's giving me a real felt smile, there should be a little bit of a bag under the eye. They should slant down to the outside. So if the mouth moves and the eyes don't, I got a really good idea if that's a real smile. Even if they're wearing a mask, if the eyes move, I know they're smiling, even if I don't see their mouth. The one thing, without going down a big rabbit hole, unless you really want me to, is the single worldwide, a man named Charles Bond did 2 global research studies. We're talking thousands of people were involved. And literally the #1 misconception cross-culturally around the world related to deception is broken eye contact. People assume that if somebody breaks eye contact, they're lying. And that has been scientifically proven to be untrue. Within our own cultural and personality norms, we maintain eye contact when we're comfortable, and we break eye contact when we're uncomfortable. So if I'm comfortable telling you a lie, I'm going to look you right in the eye and let it fly. If I'm uncomfortable telling you the truth, I'm going to break eye contact when I'm telling you the truth. The other huge myth that has been scientifically, unequivocally debunked is that when people look to one direction, they're lying, and when they look to another direction, they're telling the truth. That's 100% untrue. So again, getting back to some of the myths and misnomers, yes, the eyes do carry a ton of intelligence. In fact, if we're going to talk about deception for one last second, the one behavior with the eyes that has been reasonably, not entirely, not for certain, not 100%, but reasonably correlated to deception has been dilated pupils. But if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're staring close enough to their face to see if their pupils are dilating or not, we probably have another set of problems to deal with anyway. So as long as we're reading these behaviors for contextually appropriate signs of emotional changes, that we can reasonably identify what the trigger was and what that means for the value we're trying to create in this conversation, we can be very successful with those observations. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I agree.
Oh, it's long. Perfect. I don't think long. I think perfect. I love your response. You're very articulate. I really appreciate that. It's going to, the listeners, guarantee you're enjoying this. You might want to rewind that last bit, because that was perfect. I thought about people say, the same thing. If they look away, what are you hiding? I'm not hiding anything. Or, oh, if you look up to the left, you're lying. You look up to the, give me a break. So I remember first being introduced to that probably about 20 years ago at a conference I went to, and a guy was up on stage talking about how you can tell, and it was about sales. Watch the person's eyes. If they do this, if they turn this way and that way. And I'm thinking, That's garbage. I didn't agree with that. And that was 20 years ago. And I'm not, obviously 20 years later, I'm a lot more versed in it because I own a finance business, just so you know. I've been a financial professional, own my own agency now. This is my 20th year. And I've had to learn to be really good at watching, listening, and being cognizant of, how people are reacting. And I like how you put too about the words. The word in the prior statement when you talked about the words changing. They're saying one thing and then all of a sudden things change. I look for that uncomfortableness of them even sitting or standing, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It can mean that something, I need to say something to bring out what's bothering them instead of just getting to the pitch. Just like most business people get to the pitch, they just want to sell. They're transactional, they're not a relationship base. So I really like what you are talking about and what you're teaching people. One of the things I'd really like to understand a little bit more, because you did touch on in your origin about how you went from one career, being in interrogation and getting into helping businesses. What can you think about? What was the specific trigger that you realized, because of your unique background of forensics and interrogation, that you could be a help to business people?
Yes, and I'm going to make fun of myself after talking about reading behavior, because I'm going to tell you a story that's going to cause you to question my ability to do just that. So I was teaching an interview and interrogation session, one of my former company's flagship 2-day courses, and there was a CEO in this particular class, and he was asking 5 questions to anybody else's 1. And by this, halfway through the second morning, I'm like, this guy hates everything I have to say. He's asking me so many questions. I mean, he can't possibly be enjoying this. So day 2 is over. I give everybody their certificates, shake their hands. I'm packing up all my gear. He walks up to me and says, Michael, I love that. Do you have time for me to buy you a beer? And I literally looked up and I was like, didn't see that coming, but my favorite beer is a free beer. So yes, I will meet you in the hotel lobby shortly. So I packed up all my gear. His name's Joe. And I went and sat down with him, and that was really the first conversation. I'd been around CEOs and senior executives before, but mostly as a set of ears, helping solve a bigger problem, something to do with theft or integrity or something like that. So really, this was among, if not the very first, top level learning from an executive conversation I'd ever been a part of. And he told me that from his perspective, he had experienced some pretty significant fraud in his company. So that's why he wanted to take this course. And he told me that not only was he hearing things that helped apply to the previous fraud that he had dealt with, but also he was hearing things that applied to the conversations that he had running his business. And I'm listening to him like, cool, thank you. And then he got to the point where he asked me if I had heard of a CEO organization that he belongs to. And I sheepishly said, no, I had not. And he said that he had the ability to coordinate a 3-day training program that he would invite CEOs internationally to attend. Would I be interested in doing it? And at that point, I had enough Guinness where I said, yeah, absolutely. And we shook hands on it. I woke up the next day and say, wait, what did I just agree to do? I partnered with Joe and put together essentially a 3-day course that was interrogation for executives. And when I ran it, it was very well received. People were very complimentary of it. I think we had 32 people from 12 different countries. The first time I did it, we were in Chicago. But the feedback that I got was it needed to be brought just a few degrees more towards business, because although I felt like I was applying the material to business, the business audience felt like I was really teaching interrogation techniques. So I didn't bring it quite far enough from them. My perspective didn't align with theirs. So Joe said, you got a year to make the adjustment. We're going to move this to Vegas next year. Well, roger that. So that started really diving into the research. And the more that I ran these programs, and thankfully I was very lucky that this was a group internationally that really took me in and apparently enjoyed my programs and brought me to all kinds of places and introduced me to all kinds of great people. But I would say probably, give or take, because I don't want to short anybody, 6 or so of these high-level CEOs from around the world really took me under their wing and pointed me in research directions and gave me opportunities to develop and try new content. And it was during that phase that I came to the two realizations that I mentioned before about the skills that leaders and interrogators share and the cognitive processes that interrogation suspects, employees, and customers share. And then once I came to those, I was like, okay, new plan. I'm going to focus on creating business-oriented training programs, leadership communication, sales, negotiation, customer service, candidate interviewing that are no longer interrogation skills for these. But I'm going to go track down a wide range of business communication research from a lot of these silos that don't normally overlap. I'm going to take the highlights from those and then take these key interrogation techniques and make those like the laces that tie the shoes together. And those will be the programs that I continue to develop and teach. And that research is what eventually led to coining of the discipline listening method and developing almost 200 hours worth of content that we have now, and has really facilitated my transition from full-time interrogation to full-time executive resource.
Wow. That's amazing what triggered all of this and to where you are today. One of the things I want the listeners to understand too, it's key in business to be humble. And you went out, these people, you sat with them, you went to this conference. I believe you said there was 32 people from 12 different countries, and you were open to listening to constructive criticism, pivoting, changing and developing and, to what they wanted. But the thing that I want the listeners to understand is you had somebody that was willing to mentor you. And then that eventually evolved where you, like you said, you had, half a dozen people took you under their wing. And from there, you've developed a couple hundred hours of courses and information. And that is amazing. But it all is the fact that goes back to Michael being a person that's willing to pivot, adjust, climb, and realize that he's still got stuff to learn. And I imagine there's still stuff that you're learning in regards to human behavior and how you can help out executives. But it's interesting, again, I love the fact that it all started out as a part-time thing, going to the manager, getting into interrogation. It's just, you have a really interesting life that you're leading, like you've led and continue to lead. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, you developed an innovative disciplined listening method by combining persuasive, perceptive methods of certified forensic interviews with current research, theories, and expectations from the business world. I was recently asked during an interview myself, if I could tell my younger self one thing, what would that be? My answer was to be a better listener and to be present in every conversation. Today, people listen to speak, again, without truly listening and being present in what the other person or persons are saying. How bad has this become, do you think, and why has it become so prevalent?
I guess I was going to use a word that I don't want to use again. It starts with a P and ends with ick. I think we've all heard it way too much over the last couple of years. But I think I guess we'll call it the spreading of this lack of listening is essentially what you're getting to society-wide. And this is my opinion, so people can choose to agree or disagree. I don't claim to have the science to back it up. Is that listening has been disincentivized. We are no longer incentivized to listen. And factor that into how our brains are wired. Our brains are wired literally to seek out information that confirms how we already think and feel, and disregard information that contradicts how we already think and feel. And the one thing that our brains detest the most is discomfort. So the single easiest example will be buyer's remorse. I'm somebody that gets buyer's remorse buying a pack of gum. But if we go out, we spend a bunch of money on something that feels great when we do it. The next day we wake up and like, oh, what did I do that for? That's not me. I need that money for something else. I can't believe I did that. But as soon as we start feeling that, cognitive dissonance sets in, and now we justify or rationalize that big ticket purchase. Essentially what we do is we give ourselves an excuse for the action. We line it up with our self-image so we feel better about it. The discomfort goes away and we can go on with our life. So in the world we have now, we take how our brains are wired. We look for information that confirms what we think or believe. We disregard the opposite. We actively try to erase discomfort from our brain. We seek to socialize and include ourselves within groups, people who have similar important values, beliefs, and perspectives. We tend to shun out groups, people who think and believe have the opposite. So that's how our brain's wired. And now throw in nonstop information, big data, algorithms, social media, all of these things where we are literally incentivized to pick a side, stay in that side, not only ignore, but to actively disengage or worse, antagonize the opposite side. And in a room where, this could be a virtual room, in a world where people are putting themselves in these echo chambers or being put in these echo chambers without even realizing it. In order to get attention, often the bar has to be raised for who is saying or believing the most outrageous thing in order for us to gain the attention and the external validation we want from these groups we've aligned ourselves with. And then if we wanted to fact check anything, that takes time, it takes effort, and could create discomfort. So why would I go validate it on the backside if I'm busy and don't want to expose myself to this discomfort? And we can factor in the increase of technology and the decrease of personal communication. And we can factor in the increase of time constraints on our daily lives and all the things we need to do and how we feel that compressing. But literally, time is the enemy of empathy. Anytime we prioritize time over connecting with somebody, we're missing that opportunity to connect. So I truly believe that we have, unfortunately, got ourselves to a place, and maybe we might be getting to a tipping point soon, and it might go back the other way, but we've gotten ourselves to a point where we are incentivized not to listen, to take these positions. We're rewarded for this, either socially with this external feedback or internally, we line it up with the self-image we've created. And the vulnerability that is required to truly listen and try to connect with somebody who's different is a risk that people aren't willing to run. So I'm trying not to get social political. I don't think that's necessarily the forum, and I don't want to drag us down that road. I do believe that as a society, listening has been disincentivized or de-incentivized. I'm not sure. I should probably look up the proper way to say that so I don't make a fool out of myself.
Oh, you're definitely not making a fool of yourself, brother. One of the things I like, though, is you said there's no science behind it, but this isn't, everything that we do in life doesn't necessarily have a science backed. Sometimes it's just life. Sometimes we can validate things like you are, just because the reason I wanted this question, us to have a conversation about it, is because of the fact that you're very unique in where you've gone in your life, from interrogation to helping executives. And as we have this conversation, I'm learning more and more about how unique you are. And definitely the listeners, if they're not, I'd be shocked, because I know I'm intrigued and continue to be intrigued on exactly your thought process. So sometimes our thought process is just as valid as if somebody says, oh, we did this scientific research study of 100 people and we came up with this number. Sometimes people don't care about the numbers. They just want to care about what Michael has to say, like I do right now. So I really appreciate some of the things you talked about. And, you mentioned the fact that listening is not incentivized. Well, that is so true. It's not. People are very, why do I want to spend time listening? What's in it for me? That's what I get about. Take away the word incentivized. What's in it for me? Why am I listening to Michael? What's in it for me? Right. And, you talked about the fact of, I wrote down here because I coach on this all the time. Like, listen to listeners. Again, if you're a new listener, if you're an old listener, you understand, I've talked about this before. Our brain does not know the difference between a lie and a truth. We program ourselves. We listen to other people. And like you mentioned, social media, people they pick a side. And then they broadcast about that, and they dig their feet in. They're not willing to go and check out the information and validate it, because, like you mentioned, maybe it's time. I think a lot of times it's not even time. They can find time to binge watch something on a Netflix, but that they can't find time to validate what they're broadcasting. And then they get butt hurt when people not necessarily contradict it, but question what they're saying or outright tell them that they're a quack. I think it's uncomfortable. I think that's why a lot of people they pick a side and then they leave social media, or the people that shut off commenting. That really slays me. They put up something, yet they're not willing to let somebody comment on it. So great responses though. But what's your feeling about the fact of what I said though, in regards to, again, it doesn't have to be scientific. It's just, what are your thoughts about our brain and how it differentiates between a lie and a truth?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. And it's the old Seinfeld line, it's not a lie if you believe it's true.
Yeah.
And there's even our memory over time. We feel like we remember something exactly the way it happened, but we don't. And that's not our brain lying to us. That's just pieces of memories colliding with pieces of other memories, and certain neural pathways getting shut down over time. And it's what we believe something to be, even though there's no deception involved with recalling or telling that story. When we talk about recognizing lies, and I might be taking this in a bit of a different direction, a man named Timothy Levine, who's out of the University of Alabama at Birmingham currently, but he's taught all over the world at various universities, has an exhaustive amount of research on the topic of truth and deception. His book is Duped, if anybody's looking for that, D-U-P-E-D. I will say it's a textbook. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I went through several highlighters. I'm a nerd. I look for that stuff. So it's a textbook, but it's a wealth of information. But he's pretty clear. I think, if I recall correctly, the number he used was, we discover roughly 80% of the lies that we do discover. So let's look at just 100% of the lies that we do discover. About 80% of those we discover after the fact, by running into some sort of evidence or some sort of proof and saying, hey, wait a minute. But we often rationalize that to ourselves as, I knew he was lying, now that all of a sudden we found the truth, whether we did or didn't at the time. So when we're having conversations with somebody, there is literally zero indication. There is no single behavior that's always indicative of truth or deception, period. What we do see, what we can observe, are shifts in somebody's emotional state. Do they appear to be becoming more comfortable or less comfortable as topics change within the conversation? And often when we see somebody's comfort level change and we think, oh, they're lying to me, it's not their behavior. We think it's their behavior. Robert Cialdini, one of the greatest minds in influence and persuasion, his last name is Cialdini. I would highly recommend anything he's ever written. In his, I think, most recent book, Persuasion, is the first time that I at least caught him publishing the concept that we often mistake what is focal for what is causal. Meaning we often mistake what we're focusing on right now to be the cause behind whatever we're experiencing. So I see you look away, rub your beard, and adjust your glasses, and I'm like, oh, he must be lying. Well, that could be for any number of things. It doesn't mean you're lying. So, but when we're right, when we guess right, it's often not because of the behavior itself. It's because of the context of the situation that behavior happened in. Context is king. But generally, unless we're making a conscious effort, we're not aware of that context. So because we're not aware of that context, we think like trivia: lie, truth, lie, truth, lie, truth. When in reality, I honestly believe that in the vast majority of circumstances, I don't care if somebody's lying to me or not. I care what their emotional shifts likely mean they're thinking or feeling at any moment in time, and how those thoughts and feelings relate to the goals we're trying to achieve together, because that is going to illuminate the path forward for us. So personally, I think we get stuck on this whole trying to catch somebody lying deal. But if we're trying to do it, especially in real time, that contextual awareness is by far the most important piece. So I may have taken that in a different road.
That's fine. That's what a conversation is, though, right? We go where it goes. We start out the fact of whether a brain knows the difference between the lie and the truth, but it's at the end of it, you said, you're right, though. People want to catch people in lies. What a waste of energy.
You ain't kidding.
To me, that's just a waste of brain energy. If somebody's outright lying to me, and I'm certainly not at the level of you, but I've been practicing for, like I said, 20 years at this, at understanding body language, tonality, and people's uncomfortableness because I'm at their kitchen table or I'm at their business dealing with a business person. And I want to make sure that I can give them what they need to open up and be vulnerable so that I can actually help them get to the solution instead of them fixating on all the problems and maybe all the lies that they've heard from their staff or their competitors or their family. Because like I said, I'm sitting at somebody's kitchen table. So I really appreciate the fact that you brought that up, because listeners and people watching on the YouTube channel, you really don't need to focus so much on the lie. Just focus on the emotional side, like Michael was saying. So I appreciate you saying that. So your new book reveals the shortcomings of traditional listening techniques, illustrates the need for more strategic approach, and outlines the 7 core behaviors of disciplined listening. Can you tell us what are the shortcomings of traditional listening, and can you touch on the 7 core behaviors of disciplined listening?
Yes and yes. So when we talk about the limitations, I want to make it clear that I don't ever want to be perceived as somebody who comes out and says the old way is bad, just do it the new way. Under no circumstances. So when we think about active listening, what's traditionally been taught as active listening since the 50s, that often comes down to maintain good eye contact, mirror their body posture, smile and nod, paraphrase what they say, etc. And all of those things are done and were correctly coached to be done because they demonstrate attentiveness. And essentially, if I appear more attentive to you, you will likely continue to share more information with me. All those things are true. One of the downfalls with that is I'm sure many of your listeners are experts at smiling and nodding and mirroring body posture and keeping good eye contact and paraphrasing the last thing they heard, all while more or less ignoring the person who's speaking with them and either thinking about something else going on in their life or what they want to say next or how they feel based on what they're hearing. So we're not really listening, we're pretending to listen in order to encourage the person to continue to talk. So with disciplined listening, all of the active listening things we've been coached to do still apply. I want to make that clear. They still apply. We're not coaching not to do those things. What we're coaching to do is listen for opportunities to unlock hidden value. Where can I learn something? Where can I be surprised? I want to listen for intelligence, not information. What are the nuances in the delivery? What are some of the offhand comments that are being made that add real value to where I'm trying to go and how I'm trying to connect with somebody, that if I'm just playing the old smile and nod game, I'm going to miss, because I'm probably in a check the box mentality trying to get to a result that I've already agreed upon in my own mind, as opposed to listening for intelligence and letting the intelligence potentially guide me to a new and even better outcome. So with that, when I set out to develop the disciplined listening method, coming from the world of interview and interrogation, there's any number of interrogation methods. Some of them are great. Some of them aren't. Most of them have numbered steps, do 1 through whatever. And believe it or not, it's actually pretty easy to do that in a lot of interrogation scenarios, because more or less, you got one person talking to one person in a controlled environment. So to go step 1 through 10, 15, whatever it is, it's not that difficult to do, believe it or not, in those situations. But when we talk about the conversations you're referencing, being in somebody's business, sitting at somebody's kitchen table, being at a dinner meeting, being out at a bar, being in a networking event, these multi-party negotiations or iterative conversations, really hard to try to 1 through 10 step those. So instead, what we looked at is what are the core, as disciplined listeners, what are the core behaviors we should be executing in every one of our conversations to provide, to promote or to really focus on creating value above all else. So with that, we came up with the 7 core behaviors, 2 of which are prior to the conversation, 4 of which are during the conversation, and 1 of which is after the fact. So for the 2 pre-conversation behaviors, the first one is to elevate our mind's eye and understand how any interaction can get us closer, not just to achieving our short-term goals, but our long-term goals as well. Because the research is clear that we tend to put as much focus and effort into any conversation based on our expectations. So if I expect a conversation to be a waste of time, if I expect it to degenerate into an argument, if I expect it to go nowhere, then I'm literally going to put in less time and effort and focus into this conversation. Now, if I expect this conversation to produce value, If I expect to learn something, if I expect to advance a relationship or a project or an opportunity, now I'm more likely to commit more energy, more focus, more attention. So by raising our mind's eye from the tactical short-term goal to the strategic long-term goal, we position ourselves to capture more intelligence, stay more emotionally, I guess, flat, not necessarily experiencing the same peaks and valleys, and engaged in the conversation. The second pre-conversation stage, and I'll pause after this one if you want before getting into the rest, is preparing for our high-value conversations. And y'all decide what's a high-value conversation for you. It could be different for any one of us. Preparing for our high-value conversations by leveraging our perceived weaknesses, not our perceived strengths. The bottom line is, if I'm having a conversation with you and you have information that I need, you are in complete control of this conversation, regardless of our title, position, physical size, stature, any of that, because you are going to be the one that chooses to share information, decides what information is acceptable to share and under what circumstances it's acceptable to share it. So if I try to impose my strengths on you and I try to force control of this conversation on you, you're more likely to get defensive and maintain control of that conversation. And the best way to maintain control is not give me what I need. So by leveraging our communication or leveraging our weaknesses or perceived weaknesses to create our communication strategies, I don't ask myself, why should Dwight commit to doing what I need him to? I ask myself, why shouldn't Dwight commit to doing what I need him to? And I'm a caveman. I'm old school. I'm going to write that down. Then I'm going to look at that list and say to myself, okay, with all of those things in mind, what does Dwight need to experience before choosing to commit to what I need him to? So I'm not creating this plan based on what I think I need to say or do. I'm basing this on what I think you need to experience. And now I'm taking ownership of your communication experience in order to help reduce the resistance and increase the commitment on your end in order to get to where we need to be at the end of the conversation. So those would be the two strategic steps prior to engaging. And I'll pause there before I hit the next four.
Yeah, there's so much nuggets of information in there. That was, I like you said, active listening still applies, right? You need to listen to unlock things, and most people just don't do that. But I think the thing that I valued the most of that, not that all of it wasn't great, was the fact that, leverage the weakness. Like it is so true. We're sitting there, and you mentioned also that the other person controls the conversation because they have the information. It's no different than you and I talking right now. I'm wanting information from you. You're controlling the conversation. So this is a prime example of what you're talking about. And in order for you to share more information, I need to have, obviously you want to see the fact that I'm listening to you. I need to also respond in a way so that you want to continually share. So, I really appreciate what you're having to say. I don't want to waste any time. I want to continue on with the other four, and we'll talk about that after the fact. So go ahead.
So the four core behaviors for during the conversation. The first one is be patient and let the conversation come to you. Again, time is the enemy of empathy. Time is the enemy of learning. If we're not learning, we're not listening. The more somebody else talks, the more we learn, the more intelligence we gather. Also, going back to Tim Levine's research, when we engage in a conversation, we generally start talking before we have fully thought through what we're going to say. So that means if you're thinking and talking at the same time, there's a reasonable likelihood the most valuable thing you have to say is going to come towards the end of your statement. So I want to give you rope. I want to let you go for as long as I can. While I'm letting the conversation come to me, I'm not chasing it down. I'm not creating resistance. I'm learning. I'm also observing. So the next behavior is observe the totality of the verbal and nonverbal communication for these indications of emotional shifts. I don't care if you're lying to me or not. If somebody is lying to me, they're probably exercising what they believe to be their best available decision at the time to protect themselves or their interests. Congratulations. Good for them. There's no need for me to get emotionally wrapped up in that. So instead, I'm going to observe the totality of their verbal and nonverbal communication for the indications of these emotional shifts. And I'm going to ask myself, okay, what are they thinking and feeling, and how does that impact the goals I'm trying to achieve? which leads into the next core behavior, which is adapting our strategy in real time. So you talked about it earlier, reading people's behavior. Do I need to keep going down this road? Do I need to step back? Do I need to step away? You gave the analogy earlier with, I think it was Sally and Johnny, maybe, were the names that you used at the start of the conversation. I want to be able to make real-time adjustments in my conversation based on everything that I'm observing. There might be a new road for me to go down, or maybe today's not the day to go down the road I really want to. And within all of that, the last core behavior during the conversation is to always encourage people to save face and protect their self-image. Always. The number one fear that will stop most people from doing most things is not failure, it's embarrassment. So whether I'm talking with CEOs, high-level executives, whether I'm interrogating somebody, whether I'm working with a client, whether I'm teaching a class and somebody asks a question, it doesn't matter. I want to go out of my way not to embarrass somebody, out of my way not to cause somebody to feel judged, out of my way not to ask them a question that could in any way cause them to feel stupid, because that is going to kick them into a defensive mode. And once they're in a defensive mode, their priority isn't being vulnerable with me. Their priority is protecting their own emotions, their own self-image. So I would argue that if you want someone to say or do something that they don't want to say or do, roughly 85% of that battle at a minimum is helping them align the new statements or align their new actions with their self-image. And if we can help them do that, we're home free. The last behavior I'll just hit real quick after the post-conversation behavior is follow up. When we use these active listening behaviors, we give the impression that we're listening. The only way that we can prove beyond a doubt that we did listen to somebody is take something we heard or experienced during that conversation and follow up with them at a later date and time. If I retain what I experienced, and now whether it's in a formal conversation or at the water cooler or in the car or through a text message, whatever is appropriate, if I retain that information that I had previously, and now I circle back with it later on, I am proving to you that I listened. And once I prove to you that I listened, now I'm increasing the trust equity in the relationship and allowing you to feel far more comfortable being vulnerable.
That is, wow. Rewind, listeners, people watching, this whole conversation is worth a listen to again for whoever's currently listening or watching. There are so many things I wrote down here. In regards to one of the things that really keyed for me is always allow people to save face and not be embarrassed. I've been in circumstances where there's one-on-one or a group of people, or even somebody up on a stage, you'll have a Q&A. They might have a panel of people and somebody will yell out something. And one of the other, I've seen people in the panel contradict one another. Worst thing possible, that person is now in the defense, and then you're going to have half the audience that's rooting for one, half the audience that's rooting for the other. Their brain shut off, they stop learning, and if there's lots of conference left, you've lost people, right? People just don't get it. You need to always allow somebody to save face, and like you said, then they're going to still be willing to be vulnerable and communicate with us, whether it's a one-on-one or a group. But yeah, I'm not going to get it too detailed into it. People, buy the book, reach out to Michael, right? I'm definitely going to get it. I can imagine the great things that I'm going to be learning from it. I've already learned quite a bit from you already. So yeah, we're going to leave that one to percolate with people that have been listening. Reach out to you again, buy the book. There's a few other things I want to get through before our time's up. So Michael, why is it so important for leaders to understand potentially contentious conversations and what listening experience during those important interactions? You talk about it, but why is it so important for their actual leadership abilities?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I know we're running short on time. First, our personal brand as leaders is literally built on our perception as listeners, period. The better people perceive us as listeners, the better they perceive us as leaders. Done. And unfortunately, we don't get to choose if we're good listeners or not. Only our audiences can. So if we use those two facts as a backdrop, when we engage again, one of the core tenets of disciplined listening is taking responsibility for how our audiences experience our interactions. So if I go into a conversation thinking, I need Dwight to understand what a problem this is, how his behavior is affecting me and the rest of the team, and why he needs to change it, there's no value in this conversation. And honestly, this isn't even about you. This is about me. This is about me getting my emotions on the table, assuming you will then correct your behavior based on how I feel. How arrogant and self-serving is that? So if we get into a conversation with anybody, but especially if there's a disparity in perceived or real rank or position within an organization, that disparity in rank or position creates different listening perceptions. And a woman named Marguerite Imhoff from Germany has done a bunch of research into behaviors and expectations on both sides of those subordinate and superior conversations. So it's really important if just asserting our superiority in a conversation is all that's important to us, then congratulations, have fun, let me know how that goes. But if we're literally taking time out of our day to have a conversation with somebody because there is an outcome of that conversation that's valuable enough to us, we're taking the time to have the conversation to begin with, then being successful in that conversation starts by understanding what the people are experiencing. Let me say that in proper English, starts by understanding who we speak with and what they're experiencing during that conversation. So we can do a better job addressing that roller coaster. We can do a better job compartmentalizing our own emotions and lead the conversation to our desired outcome.
Goes back to the calmness thing too, though. If people can keep emotion, obviously we're all emotional creatures, but back to what we talked about toward the beginning of this conversation and being calm. If somebody can be calm and listen, and even if that person is wrong and you're trying to correct their behaviors, if you bring your emotional state of how they make you feel into the situation, as you mentioned, it's just good luck with that. You're just going to crash and burn. You're just talking to feel like you're important, and maybe you are important. Maybe you're a leader listening to this podcast and you're a CEO, you're a boss, and it's my way or the highway. Well, that has died so long ago, but unfortunately it hasn't died. It's still prevalent in the marketplace today in North America, around the world. We need to be calm. We need to think before we have that conversation, before we talk, and think to myself, well, this person, this is what they're doing. This is what it's causing. Maybe they're a subordinate that's the boss of other subordinates and they're not happy and their production's down. I think to myself, how am I going to talk to that person? What am I going to say? And how am I going to stay calm enough? Because they're going to react. No matter how calm I am, when you tell somebody and you're critical, let's be real, they're going to react. There's going to be some emotion, but we can quell some of that emotion so that it's a little heightened and not out of control to where we're just talking and listening to ourselves talk. So I really like what you had to say. I appreciate that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I'll just do it real quick. The 7 stages of contentious conversations, I won't dive into them again because I know we're short for time. But first, please remember is the pre-conversation. People bring their entire relevant life experiences into our conversation. So if we ignore that going into any conversation, we're already behind. The next one is the introduction. 3 different and completely independent research studies have shown that we're capable of judging somebody's trustworthiness, their intelligence. I believe their character was one. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. There's a half a dozen, but definitely their trustworthiness, their intelligence, and we categorize people, put a label on them as fast as 100 milliseconds, from 100 to 500 milliseconds when we meet them.
Wow.
So within the first 100 milliseconds, they are judging us and labeling us based on their life experience. So at the introduction, kindness, respect, don't sit behind your desk and say, come in and shut the door, meet them at the door, shake their hand, welcome them, offer them a coffee or water, something like that. Once the conversation starts and they start to listen, please remember, they're not necessarily listening to understand us. They're listening to figure out where's this conversation going and what does it have to do with me? Now, once they feel like they've solved that riddle, then they transition to the internalization and self-talk phase, where they're not really listening to us, and nor should they be, Because now that they've figured out they've solved the riddle, now they're talking to themselves about, what do I say? What don't I say? Under what conditions is it okay for me to say it? It's this internal negotiation. At the end of the internal negotiation, they say, okay, here's what I'm willing to say, and here's the conditions that I'm willing to say it in. But once they join the conversation, it doesn't mean they're staying. As the conversation continues, they can choose to continue to contribute, or they can choose to punch out. And by punching out, they might not get up and leave. They might start giving one-word answers. They might become antagonistic or sarcastic. They might stop speaking at all. So these passive-aggressive, it could be passive-aggressive or passive-aggressive behaviors that we see at that point in time. And then we have, after the conversation, again, the follow-up stage. So it's important to remember that that pre-conversation stage happens prior. The introduction stage is over 1 second into the conversation, and the follow-up stage is after. But those intervening 4 stages are rinse and repeat, and people can cycle through those any number of times as the conversation develops, as the people participating in the conversation develops, as topics and emotions change. So the more we can understand the roller coaster that somebody else is riding, the more we can make this conversation about them as opposed to about us, and help, like you talked about before, quelling the emotions and working towards the value we want to achieve, not just asserting authority or dominance.
Yeah, and I appreciate you going through those again. One of the things I really like, though, people listening, is get up. If you're a boss, you should get up from behind your desk. And I've seen it in quite a few, because I have business clients. I find that you go into their offices, the ones that are going to be the kindest or get the most respect, if you went and talk to their staff that appreciate them, they'll have a little table off to the side with a couple chairs. So if they're going to have a conversation and they say, hey, Michael, come on in, shake his hands, we just got to chat about a few things here, have a seat. And you sit literally 3 feet away from them. You're at the same level. You're not behind a big executive desk, right? Having your authority forced upon them. That's the way they feel, right? They're walking in already intimidated, not knowing what you're going to talk about. There was no pre-conversation. There was no nothing, where it could have been as easy as them reaching out, sending you a message saying, hey, pop in. I just want to, touch base on a few things. Looking forward to our conversation. Just simple words that can already quell and calm them. At least this is in my experience. I find that works. And then, like you said, meet them at the door, right? Knock, knock, open the door. Hey, Michael, great to see you. Come on in. Hey, let's sit over here and have a chat. It's the tonality, it's the energy, it's the presentation. That person's still going to be wondering what the hell is going on, but we can do some things. We can pre-stage the result. We might not get the result we want, but we can pre-stage it so we get closer to where we want to be. And people just don't take this serious enough. Again, listeners, I know I'm going to, after this recording, I'm going to be looking at ordering Michael's book, because I'm excited what else I can learn, because this is only a scratch, as Michael said, on the surface of what we can learn about how to deal with people. And again, this isn't just about dealing with business executives. This is about dealing with all people in life, being a better listener, connecting to people, to appreciation, and being present in the moment, as I mentioned and Michael's mentioned as well. So, Michael, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
I love both of those. Never giving up, of course. I would say this. I'll leave it with 2 things. Number one, think for yourself. Find the value that's important to you and listen and pursue that value. So thinking for yourself is one. And then the other is just accept that I guess I'll say it this way. Great listeners accept I'm going to try to say this one more time.
That's okay.
Try to get this right once in our conversation. Accept the risk that accompanies the vulnerability necessary to learn and be a great listener. All too often, we don't listen because it makes us feel vulnerable. It's not a risk we're willing to accept. So we shut down, we justify it to ourselves. But if we can accept the risk that comes across with the vulnerability, we'll learn a lot more. So think for yourself, accept the risk associated with that vulnerability, and prioritize long-term value over that short-term emotional benefit.
Wow, that's a great closing message. I so appreciate that. So our time is almost up, and I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you?
I appreciate that. So online, it's inquasive.com, INQUASIVE.com. If they want to learn more about the book, they can go to disciplinedlistening.com, where there's a sample chapter and a little bit they can learn about the book there, hopefully before they choose to purchase it. The book can be purchased online via Amazon or Barnes & Noble. I don't do a lot on social media, but I am on LinkedIn, Michael Reddington, CFI. If anybody wants to connect to me on LinkedIn, I certainly welcome it. Please just let me know in the message that you heard me here on the Give a Heck podcast, and I'll make sure to accept that.
Right on. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's your book is being available and stuff. I'll make sure that all this information you just shared will be in the show notes. So listeners, people watching, you can access that at giveaheck.com, go into the podcast part of the portal, and you'll be able to find all that information and how to contact Michael. One thing I will add, though, I don't think you really need to read the first chapter. After listening to all this, you should be just hitting the purchase button, in my opinion. But
thank you.
That's my opinion.
I appreciate it.
No problem. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Michael. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck. Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.